and Subu and I are hopeful to give you some practical things that you can take back that will really help you understand how you can work smarter and not harder. And again, thank you, Subu, for having me today.
Excellent. Thank you, Don, with the magical wand. And over to Kirk for your introduction.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. So Kirk Shanks, I am the president of Kersha LLC. So this is my own company. I started, it's been about a year ago now. I've been doing risk adjustment for about almost 20 years now. Started off in actuarial consulting. I've worked with multiple consulting firms over the years, a health plan for a while. But I am all about risk adjustment from the analytics standpoint, the data, knowing the data, understanding how that goes, really digging into that. So that's what I hope to offer some insight on, give you some help with, and answer any questions. So looking forward to this.
Thank you, Kirk. Pleasure to have you. And it's going to be a trifecta of different perspectives today. And with that, we will jump in with a little bit of context. First, context around the market, what's going on in the macro environment. If you think about where risk adjustment is applicable, number one is on the Affordable Care Act and also Medicaid before jumping into Medicare Advantage. Really interesting times right now, right? So, we have with Affordable Care Act in 2024, the highest enrollment, 21.4 million, doubled 11 million enrolled in 2020. So obviously with the change in the government, there we don't have any kind of magic insight there to what's going to happen, but we are assuming in this conversation that ACA is in some shape or form is going to stay, and then also Medicaid and Medicare Advantage. So there on the Medicaid side of the house, there are lots of dynamic changes going on. If you think about it, there's been significant growth, over the last few years, and also some declines recently for various reasons. And these are numbers that are actually from several research from Kaiser Family Foundation. If you've not looked at it, we'll follow up also with some specific links on some of these articles as well, because those are really insightful for everybody to know. But last but not least, on Medicaid, there are several questions heading into the fiscal year for 2025. How the unwinding related eligibility requirements that happen around COVID is going to impact enrollment and population mix, and also how it's going to really impact the economics, growth, and also the front and center of it is risk adjustment, in some of the states in Medicaid. So just giving you guys a context around this, when we are talking today, we are going to talk all three markets on risk adjustment. Some of we may take an example in one, but some of those may be applicable, best practices, etc., in other markets. So I'm not going to spend too much time here, but at the same time, wanted to put things in perspective to everybody around the market here. With jumping into Medicare Advantage, market penetration, it's just been an exciting time in Medicare Advantage with lots of headwinds, lots of tailwinds. If you know, some of the things we thought would be good to highlight here that you typically don't see in the news or in specific updates. So the number of plan offerings have slightly decreased. The Medicare Advantage premium, as you see, is consistent, compared to 2024. But what's most interesting is the out-of-pocket maximum is likely to increase to about, on an average, $1,400 per enrollee. So that's really important for every American here who are actually eligible for a Medicare Advantage. And then I'm not going to go through everything, but a couple of things here. Star rating declines. We're not going to go through a lot of detail here. At the same time, putting things in context, there's a lot of volatility. Approximately $14.7 billion lost revenue or saved money for the government, whichever way people look at it. And then there's a significant headwind and opportunities also on risk adjustment model changes, which, Kirk and Don is going to give their perspective as well. But last but not least, one thing that I thought would be, for everybody to know around this, is not often talked about. The Medicare Advantage population is increasingly getting more and more diverse than fee-for-service. So it's getting more complex. So as you see, like 52% of Medicare Advantage live below 200 of the poverty level compared to 33% fee-for-service. That means there's more vulnerable population who are joining Medicare Advantage, and the supplemental, all the benefits needs to be more rich, and there needs to be more focus on social determinants, et cetera, for enabling the right care to all the members. So this is just a context, but with that, we're just going to go into some of the highlights here around stars. We're not going to go so deep, but at the same time, there's enough press around the declines within the star ratings. And if you think about coming in moving forward, we got CAPS rating in stars for people who live and breathe stars. So some of them have joined here. There's a lot of changes, and people are already preparing or working on it right now. There are call center measures. There are some outstanding lawsuits, and then health equity. The health equity index is here, right? So it's actually going to begin, in 2027 stars. But at the same time, the work actually has, already either started. If you have not started, if you're a health plan or a provider group, if you've not started, it's already high time to start, because that's going to replace over time what's called the bonus factor, which is more than half a star in some cases. So with that, I'm going to also give a highlight and some a little bit deep dive around risk adjustment. There's been a lot of changes, but let's start. I'm going to start with Kirk. Kirk, there's been, within context around stars and market overall, if you could just give, from your perspective at a high level, some of the recent changes across different markets and risk adjustment.
Well, of course, the big one, is your first bullet point there. Of course, transitioning to the new model, the 2024 version 28 model. Now, the big changes that went on with that model, of course, recalibrated all the values of the models. But then the main thing was about 2,000 diagnosis codes were dropped from the new model. So there's certain conditions that on the old model, the version 24, your members would have been risk scored for, and now effectively those are worth zero from a risk adjustment standpoint. So that's a lot of codes. And also there's a downward pressure financially on the new model. You will see risk scores dropping going from the old to the new model. Now it's currently in a blended phase where we're going 2/3, 1/3. Next year it'll be 1/3, 2/3, and then finally 100% the following year, right? For the new model. And depending on your membership, you could have, it could be a 2%, 3%. It depends what that change in your finances are going to be. That's huge. And the other thing on the HHS OIG audits, so not just HHS OIG audits, but audits in general. In the past, they have not allowed CMS to estimate across the population. So if they did an audit and they found $200,000 and they would extrapolate that and say, oh, well, that's actually 10 million for your population. And they would say, no, you can't do that. So it was just 200,000. But starting just recently, the last couple audits, starting with the 2018 dates of service, I believe, they will now allow to extrapolate. So you will now see, instead of 200,000, if you're audited, they will extrapolate to that 10 million or whatever the dollar value is across your population.
And thank you, Kirk. And I think just for folks who are new to risk adjustment, right? So there's some folks I see their risk adjustment, join from risk adjustment teams. So just to reiterate, if you can highlight, right? So about the model change from for the Medicare Advantage, right? If you could talk about like the changes that you that CMS made, what phasing into 100%, what does it mean for a health plan, or like what are when you're working with a health plan or a provider, what are they really worried about? What are the opportunities that you see?
Well, I mean, obviously, you're worried about the loss in revenue. That is the big one. The opportunities, anything with risk adjustment always comes from the data, right? You have to start with your data. You have to be getting in front of your risk adjustment processes to be able to tackle this, so that you can, when you're doing your forecasting, you need to be able to forecast accurately. You got to have, you need to know who your membership is. You got to have the data there. You've got to have, the models are not just like a single model also. So you need to know there's actually 15 subsegments to each model. So we've got two models being blended, right? Well, that's actually 15 different subsegments being blended with 15 other different subsegments. You got community, institutional. The community is broken down into 6 subsegments: non-dual, dual, partial duals, etc. Age, disabled, and then you got the C-SNPs, the new enrollees. So you've got all these different models. It's very complicated, and if you don't have your data in line to start the process, I mean, well, garbage in, garbage out, right? You won't be able to do anything. You'll be, I can tell Dawn to go code some charts, but first thing she's going to ask me is, what charts? Well, that's where you got to have your data and your analytics got to be in shape, and making sure that you've got everything coming in on the front end, got everything organized, and you can then get your team in an organized fashion, their marching orders.
Yeah. That's well said, Kirk. Thank you. And the different commune models you mentioned, that's actually one of the things I also see, like not many people are really kind of doing the really micro-targeting, right, in each of the models.
Well, and then not only, most people think of the Part C model, but then there's also the Part C ESRD model, right? Because when you're thinking of the Part C model, that's actually the Part C non-ESRD. Then there's the Part C ESRD model. And then there's the Part D model. So, and each of them have multiple subsegments. So there's a lot going on if you're trying to accurately track all of this stuff. There is just so many moving parts.
Yeah. So with that, so many moving parts and changes done, what are clients or other team members done asking you to kind of take your magic wand? What are the frequently asked requests, especially when it comes to model changes from your operational perspective?
So luckily, I have like 5 quick bullets that I always give people that are kind of as we're market agnostic, right? Because we want to give you some tools that will work no matter what subsegment of the market that you are in. So I have 5 pretty standard ones that apply to most health plans, and I find that a lot of them struggle with understanding data. and understanding provider behavior. So the first in all of this is partnering with stakeholders and physicians and other providers to review these changes, so that you can level set, where they are now, right? And so that they understand, what's coming and how it could affect them, and being armed with that information, because, providers do not like it when things are sprung upon them at the last minute or it's a surprise. So partnering with them early, and of course, now we're into this transition, it should already be happening, but don't, just do it when a provider's in trouble, right? Or is found to have poor documentation or whatever the case may be. It's an ongoing process, and they want to hear what they're doing well as what they are not. And to that effect, make sure you're analyzing your benchmarks and review the current population prevalence of these chronic conditions. You want to stay on top of that, particularly the ones that are the most pervasive and have the highest prevalence. That way, you are not surprised at what your RAF is in the end and the payments that you're getting. So analyze those benchmarks and understand where you're sitting. Big one here, and again, because I hold a number of coding credentials, I look at things through this lens. Review provider performance of capturing HCCs and review their documentation needs. You're going to have to ramp up your clinical documentation improvement efforts to be sure that you are not going to suffer adversely, during this transition. And it's an ongoing thing. There are a lot of tools out there that assist, health plans and providers alike with, benchmarking, dashboards, and reporting, so they understand exactly where they stand, and so that you are actually deploying your clinical documentation improvement program appropriately and where it's going to gain the most traction and the most return on investment for what you're doing. We talked about changing your analytics, making sure that you are updating your predictions, you're understanding your population and the rates, based upon utilization patterns across that entire population. You need tools to do that, and not this guy here, not a magic wand. So luckily, there are a number of folks like Subu who are out there to help. There's vendors, of course, but the key is, recognizing, yep, I'm going to need some help with this, and making sure that you've got the appropriate folks advising you with, the analysis you need, as well as any coding and documentation needs that you might have.
And if I could add, one thing we haven't mentioned, so if you're a downstream at-risk group, right? Let's say you're a provider group who's subcontracted with the health plans, you may have 3, 4, 10 or more different health plans that you are getting data streams from. And I've heard so many times where I heard somebody, we've only got a few hundred or a few thousand members. They won't listen to us. We're not getting good data, but there's nothing we can do. That is so wrong. You are contracted. They are contracted with you. You got to make sure that you're getting good data from each and every one of them. And so you actually have a bigger lift. The health plan has it kind of easy. They have standard data sets that they get back from CMS. You have to take all of these different data sets from all these different health plans that quality may vary and work with them. So that's a big lift, I think, for the downstream at-risk groups.
We'll talk a lot in our presentation later about tools on how to do that. And we actually have a really fun metaphor that we're going to be using to do that, because it really does, it goes beyond, you can't just throw up your hands and say, well, the providers won't work with us. If you're armed with the right information and the right message, they absolutely will, because if you show them the value, they absolutely will work with you. But that's the key is, to understand how to leverage this data in these tools, and also understanding that completeness and quality, like data completeness and quality initiatives, are two-pronged. It's not just coding quality and documentation quality, it's also claims quality, and other things that we'll talk about here in just a bit.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Kirk. With that, I think we'll go into the data part of it, Don. And before that, for people who are new to the HHS OIG audits, and we'll talk about this, a very, very important topic, right? So just to peeling the layer a little bit, Kirk, from a financial standpoint, what are the things that you are seeing, with the clients? What do you actually especially for a a CFO who's managing a plan, etc. Who What are some practical insights and thoughts you have for their teams?
Yeah, well, just first of all, for those that don't know, so the HHS OIG had over the past few years have been doing these audits on specific diagnoses, conditions, such as cancers and strokes, etc. And basically, what they're doing is they're going in and looking for someone who has been documented with let's say stroke, for example, but they do not have any inpatient visits within a time frame plus or minus the diagnosis. And their reasoning is, if you had a stroke and you didn't go to the hospital, did you really have a stroke? And what these audits are finding is, in most cases, these are like history of stroke and not actual, and so they should not be coded as a stroke, and they're not risk adjustable. And they are finding these payments, lots of errors on these type of things. And as I mentioned before, now they're going to start extrapolating these across the entire population. So if they're seeing that you have, a percentage, they audit a few members with stroke, and they're seeing that all of them were history of stroke, they're going to extrapolate across your population now, so that instead of, again, 200,000, it could be 5 million, $10 million. So it's important to get up in front of this. This accurate coding is important from an operational perspective, right? You don't want to be wasting resources on some type of initiative. If you got some diabetic initiative, you want to know who your diabetics really are. You want to know who your strokes really are. And this is a couple of things you can do. HHS OIG actually has what was it, Don? They published a toolkit.
A toolkit.
A toolkit. Thank you. That's the word. They actually published a toolkit that you can follow, but you don't really have to get that detailed. As long as you're looking at your refresh rates and are putting your chronic and acute diseases separately. If you're looking at acute diseases, all of them that have been refreshed, that should be a problem. They should not have a lot of refreshed acute diseases. There will be cases, obviously, where somebody does have a stroke in a couple of years, 2 years in a row, or there may be cases where somebody had the stroke in December, went to the hospital, and it got credited to 2 years. But it should be a very small percentage. Less than 20% is my kind of benchmark for acute. Ideally, less than that. So, I just want people to know that a lot of financial people are adverse to deleting anything that's worth some money, but these are small, relatively speaking, to the total revenue. And if you're doing these, the analytics properly to find these, you also will be doing that for your chronic diseases, et cetera, and finding things that you should be adding. And you'll probably actually be on a net plus instead of a net negative. So it's just a good business practice. It's actually a good financial practice. It's just, there's really just no reason not to find these before it ever gets to an audit.
Thank you, Kirk. So, Don, from your perspective, right, I mean, obviously this is a lot of coding and nuance and operational stuff outside of like what Kirk talked about from a financial perspective. What are you seeing, and what are some of, that plans need help with? Data and analytics, targeting, Kirk talked about. How in your opinion, how are plans balancing this? And what do you recommend plans or providers to do in OIG scenario?
So in our industry, probably a lot of folks in the audience, like myself, monitor the headlines pretty closely. And we see, it seems like at least every month or so, there is a new health plan that has been targeted for this type of auditing. And to date, there have been greater than 30 plans in the last few years that have gotten one of these. And it's really like when OIG comes and not if. And if anybody has read the reports that have come out, one of the almost universal, whether it's large plan, small plan, anything in between, is needing a more robust compliance program. And of course, as Kirk mentioned, there is a toolkit, but you don't really even have to get that fancy because, it stresses, focusing on coding quality. Like I said, very important coding and documentation, but we cannot forget the data quality aspect. And what I mean is, and I'm going to pay attention for a moment to bullet point 4 here, because, CMS released, and they've been threatening this for years, about HRAs and, to disallow them for risk adjustment. And, this has been going on for a long time. And, when we were preparing for this webinar, we brought up the scenario where, when these wellness visits or HRAs are done and it's identified that somebody is a diabetic because they may be taking metformin or some other diabetic medication, the health plan, here's practical advice. They're not just going to leave that person alone and say, oh, sorry, we identified you've got diabetes, but you're on your own, right? They are going to invest care management and other resources, to make sure that they are, realizing the benefits from risk adjustment, so that they can make sure the member gets the treatment they need and all of that. But when it comes to the claims aspect and encounters aspect, you have to make sure, and we're going to talk about this in upcoming slides, you don't have a claim that's stuck somewhere that has that diagnosis on it, that says, yes, this is somebody who has gotten care for their diabetes. It's not just coming in on an HRA or an annual wellness visit or a chart review, just an unlinked chart review, because CMS is going to be closely monitoring these unlinked chart reviews. Do I think that they'll completely take them away? Probably not, but they're going to come up with some really creative ways to monitor when they are appropriate and when they're not. And it's going to involve looking at that data. Do you have a claim that's stuck somewhere in the system that could prove that out? Because more often than not, there's a data quality issue that could be at the root cause. That's why I say we've got coding quality initiatives and then just regular non-clinical, data quality issues. And so we're going to spend some time on that in upcoming slides.
Awesome. You teed it up nicely, Don, from a data perspective. That's where it starts. That's where it ends. And just to give a perspective to everyone, and Kirk, and I turn it over to you to just talk through the journey of data in the continuum of healthcare, right? And how risk adjustment and other comes in. So if we could just talk through this from a data in perspective and data out perspective.
There we go.
There we go.
So the idea here is we have to follow the data all through the process. And there are multiple points throughout the process where there is a handoff of data. And every time there's a handoff of data, there's a chance to lose the data. So you can think of starting on the left, there's a member. Think of, you have a member, they're sitting at home and they either have diabetes or they don't. That's a data point, right? So first thing you have to do is actually get them to the provider. If you don't get them to the provider, you've lost that data point. Once they get to the provider, they've got to correctly diagnose that condition. If they don't, lost the data point. It's got to be properly documented in the medical chart, et cetera, all the way through. It's got to be submitted to the CMS on the MA004's EDPS files for it to all make it through the system. And if it doesn't make it through every one of those steps, it's lost, and you don't end up with that credit for that on your revenue. And then on the reverse, you need that data to flow back. So it comes back from the government. You get the MA004s with all that data. That flows back to the health plan. You got to get in the database. You got to let that go into your analytics, so that will inform your providers of what this patient's history is, because they're not always seeing the same provider time after time, or maybe they're moving around from plan to plan or state to state. So you got to have that history and let your providers, you're just giving them that checklist. So the data, you got to watch the flow all the way through and all the way back. And at any one of these points, you could lose that data point.
Excellent. Well said, Kirk. And I love this picture. I think everybody in the industry is aware of these touch points. And John, you talked about the different leakage points. So if you could talk about from an operational perspective, Kirk eloquently talked about like the journey. And what do you see when you're working with health plans? What do you see are the opportunities or potential leaky hoses in the country?
Yes. So most of you, I see a lot of folks in the audience who have actually probably heard me speak before and know that I'm very fond of the leaky hose metaphor. And I actually have a picture of my own to kind of add to the one you saw previously that talks to, those arrows and leakage points that Kirk pointed to. And this may be a little hard to see, but what it basically is an explanation for, the root cause of why we have those errors that indicate the leakage. And it's usually failures of automation or failures of configuration. So we have as an axis here that this is automation, is this vertical axis. Configuration is the horizontal axis. So you want to be where you are very highly automated and highly, your systems are highly configurable, because that's going to maximize that financial success that Kirk is talking about. If you are low in both of those, you're probably looking at insolvency. So usually people are somewhere in between. But that's where you want to look if you are seeing that there's data leaking at those points where the arrows were. Look at your automation and look at your configuration of your systems. Now, it also starts with looking at the journey of the data along that hose. So you're looking at a hose and all these leaky points. It starts with, but doesn't end with, that full reconciliation. So we talk a lot in our industry about reconciling your MOR to your MAO4 to your MAO2, back to even your 277 CAs, your 999s, all that reporting that comes from CMS. But it also includes reconciling with your internal claims systems and even what's coming through your claims gateways. And so I'm a big advocate, and this is the most practical piece of advice I can give anybody here: construct a leakage map. And if you don't know how to do this, get in touch with Subu or myself, because I can lead you to the process of how to do that, because it is unique to every health plan, right? Because everyone has different people, processes, and technologies. But you've got to extend that analysis all the way to the beginning of the revenue cycle. And if you don't, you're going to miss where leaking happens. And as you will see on an upcoming slide, you may even have a CFO or an actuary who's like, hey, we don't understand why our claims costs are so high, but our RAF is so low. And you gotta have that leakage map, and a good analyst will be able to help you with that. It's got to be the right kind of analyst, but such a person will have such a return on investment. That CFO and actuary will love you and want to give you many bonuses so you can buy many magic wands or other tools. So that's my biggest practical advice: is construct a leakage map that has all those points on it so that you can answer that question when the CFO or the actuary comes looking for you.
Yeah, that's well said, Don. I think, I see that too, even in my recent health plan experience and talking to people. It's a low-hanging fruit.
It is.
To your point. But not many people do that. Many people actually put the resources and the money to do that, but it's not that expensive.
I'm going to give an example that will resonate probably with more of the folks on the ACA side of the house than anything. I did a consulting engagement for a health plan that had this question. And I found, and this was a commercial health plan, when I did that look back into their claims systems and claims processing, they were sending out a lot of claims for high dollar review, right? Pretty typical for health plans to do, obviously for cost control and documentation and all those things. It's a best practice, but no one was paying attention to the fact that those claims were sitting in a pen status forever. And this was $4 million in claims for burn patients. And they missed the April 30th deadline because no one was looking. And you best believe they didn't make that mistake again the following year. They put controls in place to notify when you've got claims that have a high potential to affect, risk scores, to make sure that people are monitoring those and making sure that they are making their way through the system appropriately so that they can meet that deadline for complete and accurate data.
Yeah, one of the analyses I do for my clients is I will look at their risk adjustable claims or in-house EHR data, their in-house data, and then compare that to what comes back on the MA04 on the EDPS data. And then we can actually find what diseases for which members have not been accepted. And then we can go dig into the data and say, here are the encounters that have that you need to research specifically for these members. Here's the dates of service and the diagnosis codes, and you can go find them. Now, and often you may not know what the problem is, but that is a way to find the problem, and you can be targeted. You go in, and I got one client, they've got their 2023 dates of service number of missing encounters down to just under 100 people. Out of that, they've got about 30,000 members. So we've really been able to go through and target, and you got to have these in place where you can go through and really target and not waste time trying to figure out what's wrong, but here's what's wrong. Now go find why it's wrong.
Yeah. And that you can quantify that, because if you've got, again, a CFO or an actuary, coming to you and you need resources to do this, you can easily quantify, how much revenue you're missing due to this. And
I can tell them exactly you're missing $10 million or $5 million or $50 million. I can tell you.
Yes. And if we know that, automation and configuration issues are almost always at the root cause of this, sometimes it's coding and other things, but a lot of times it's automation and configuration. Those can be expensive to fix, right? IT issues, systems, whatever, but there's a tremendous return on investment that can be proven to fix those root causes so you are not manually researching and chasing stuff all the time.
Yeah. So that's awesome. To that point, I feel like every health plan, and people, this is a question, right? But also to that point, often one of the other frequently asked questions is like, okay, the opportunity, 10 million you mentioned, and Kirk, when is that going to hit the books? When am I going to hit the revenue? So I always advise, number one, many people don't know the cycle, right? So it starts off even with any engagement, whether it's your manager, C-suite, you name it, analysts, you name it, who are in the risk adjustment quality and BBC space, they need to be grounded in when the dollars are going to come in, right? And believe us when we say it, between Don, myself, and Kirk, we have seen, if you do a random poll, 10 to 15% probably are going to know how that works in a health, in a health plan. Provider, forget about it, right? So, so there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So I think, from my perspective, I think that's one of the things that I recommend to ensure, like, before a finance person or CFO, health plan leader you're working with, you are level setting the opportunity and when it will come in. So with that, I'll also ask a question, Kirk, right to you. You work with a lot of at-risk providers, right? So it's a different financial revenue angle, right? Because depending on the BBC arrangements are so different. What are you seeing? What are the opportunities that you see around this, so that the provider or the at-risk group are maximizing the dollars that they actually really putting out there to take care of the members?
Well, there's two things. There's the data, as I mentioned earlier, getting the data flows from the different health plans, making sure that that's accurate and complete and usable, which that is a struggle in itself sometimes. And you really got to be able to go back to them and tell them why their data is wrong. You can't just say the data is no good. That does not help them. The other thing, that now the at-risk like provider groups have a bit of an advantage in that they are the provider groups and they're right in the front line. The main thing to do, so like with Medicare Advantage, it's a prospective risk adjustment model. So that means, what does that mean? This year's risk score is based on last year's diagnosis codes, right? So that means you've got a year where you've got to wait. If you put some initiative in place now to get my coding quality improvement in place, you're not going to see that money for at least a year. And the other thing to think about, there are multiple phases of the risk adjustment in Medicare Advantage. So you have the initial phase and then the mid-year adjustment that usually comes in July. If you don't have your data all submitted and accepted in time to hit that mid-year adjustment, you're going to have to wait another full year to receive the rest of any payment. And CMS does not apply any interest to that. So from a cash flow perspective, you really got to be upfront and get those visits in, those annual wellness visits in the first half of the year, get that data flowing and making sure it's getting accepted so that you're getting it by the latest by that mid-year adjustment. Now with the ACA, you got a different problem in that it is a concurrent risk adjustment model. And that means this year's dates of service go into this year's risk score. So that really ups the ante. It's the same process pretty much as far as getting the visits and getting the data, but your time frame is shortened. So you've really got to be on top of it.
Fantastic, Kirk. And related to from an operational perspective, Dan, right? What do you, a couple of points if you can highlight, especially from a prospective and retrospective standpoint, where does the data come in from an operational, standpoint? How can plans or providers can maximize the early intervention that Kirk talked about? And so, if you could just give a couple of perspectives from what you're seeing, that'll be fantastic.
Yes. So addressing points 2, 3, and 4 on this slide, I'm going to kind of put on my interoperability hat for a moment. We could give a whole webinar just on interoperability and clinical data interchange, but, really, starting with number 3, the answer to why are we, from a provider perspective, why are we burdened with this? Usually it's because, health plans are not armed with the right intelligence or, the flow of, clinical data interchange and non-clinical data like claims and things we've talked about. They don't have the right business intelligence informing their prospective and retrospective strategies, particularly given the deadlines that are unique to each line of business. And it's possible, and many health plans successfully do this, but again, right tools, not just the magic wand, because that's not going to do it. You've got to have the right tools or the right advisors helping you understand, for your people, processes, and technology and your goals, how are you going to do this and not cause provider abrasion? Because it's possible, to have a happy provider population if you've got a more proactive approach to this. And the key to this is based in interoperable systems, again, automation, configuration, and interoperability, so that you can make real-time informed decisions and exactly when your activity should be timed. So you are not burdening providers, for example, with multiple requests for the same chart. They hate that. I think all of us, everybody's probably very vigorously nodding. But there are good tools out there, and even you don't have to invest in something expensive or fancy. The right analysts can help you develop something that gives you the information you need to inform these, and so that you can see the risk and quality revenue, and you can even drill down to it from a provider perspective and do some provider tracking and trending and know who maybe has some documentation needs, who's going to be an audit risk. There are different ways you can slice and dice this data, to tell you really what you need to know from a risk and quality perspective, where the gaps are. We know that there are overlaps, so that's very important, and to work smarter and not harder.
Don, I love the way you said about like the practical things here, right? Because we are an industry where interoperability is a challenge.
It is.
It is, fire standards, etc. There, but it does, its own advantages, disadvantages. Not all the systems are bidirectional between providers and also payers. Got if you think about the middleware, all the HR companies, there is a battle like who gets the biggest pie, and it is an incredibly complicated system. But too many people go in for depend on the fancy tools, wait for the fancy tools until the outcomes happen. I think you hit the nail on the head. Is it really takes a couple of really talented people to really look at the data the right way, so that health plans or providers are not waiting for an AI enabled and fantastic digital interoperable everything going smooth, because it's going to take some time to get there.
But one other thing I like that, you got to make sure that you have some trained staff that really understand this. You can't just be taking, if you have a greatest tool in the world, if it sends everything, not everything is perfect. And you need to have somebody that can read it and look at results and be able to tell you, oh, this is a problem. This is not right. So even if you have the greatest tool in the world, you can't just put it on automation. You have to have somebody, even if you outsource everything, you have to have somebody that understands what's going on, that can at least review everything and overview. You got to watch your vendors. If you hire somebody like Subu or me, you need to have somebody overview, looking over our shoulder every once in a while to make sure that we're not doing something that we shouldn't.
Same goes for like over reliance on AI enabled tools. They are great. I work for a company apps that develops them, and I do a lot of, research and work on these technologies. But as with anything, I get asked this, oh, do you think that, coders are going to be, human coders, there'll be no need. That will never happen. There will always be a need for, a human to do that overread. Just like now we've got quality assurance on coding where there's someone overreading, particularly for new coders so, I always say, another practical piece of advice is, when you are selecting your tools, and this is to Kirk's point, have someone knowledgeable to be able to say, oh, that's not performing quite correctly, or no, that's really problematic. It's very tempting, to say, oh, I've got an AI enabled tool, I don't have to look at this anymore. That's absolutely not the right perspective to have.
Awesome, you both. And I think we have about 7 minutes that we would love to open the questions for the audience who join here. Obviously, if there are other questions people want to send, we'll be happy to answer them separately. Let's open it up. People can actually put questions on the chat. What's top of your mind after hearing all of this? No questions yet. We'll give a moment. So while questions are coming in, so we are, Don and Kirk, we have effectively about 3-4 weeks left in the year, right? In terms of closing out the year for any people who want to, what providers or health plans need to bring them into care. 12/31 is the final encounter date. And then lots of sweeps happening, whether it's in the Medicare Advantage world or the ACA world or Medicaid world. What are you hearing from your plans around wrapping up the end of the year? It's always really a stressful time for people because, especially in the risk and quality space and general value-based care, it'll be good to kind of get your thoughts.
Well, one thing to keep in mind, the data submission deadline. So not the end of the year, but January 31st next year will be the deadline for the EDPS submissions for the last was the 24 plan year, right? The 23 dates of service.
Mhm.
So that will be the final for that. And something that has changed that I didn't mention earlier. So during the pandemic, CMS had added an additional deadline later in the year for data submission. They had extended the data submission deadlines. That no longer. It's now January 31st. Your 23 dates of service. You have to have it in by then. If you're a downstream at-risk group, you got to get your data to your health plans maybe a month before that, or at least a couple of weeks before that, to give them time to process the data and make sure it's getting submitted. So that's coming up. You got to be on top of that. And if you had any members that have not had any annual wellness visits, it's hard Thanksgiving, Christmas, but if you can get them seen, now is the time if you have not.
Here's the time. Thank you, Kirk. We have a question from Violet. Thanks for the question, Violet. Any suggestions for limited access care issues or rural area limitations with travel to provider care? Which is an awesome question. John, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And this is a good segue to something I was going to, bring up. And that is, as everybody probably on this call, I know at least one person on this call knows very well, supplemental data submission is top of mind for this industry right now. Over the last year, CMS has come out with some really great guidance in terms of submitting data for, plans bid, of course, when they're doing their bidding. I won't take you into the whole process of that, but plans will include in their bids for Medicare Advantage, for supplemental benefits to presumably to provide for, situations where you've got social determinants of health and health equity type needs. This is a good one. Rural healthcare is a good example of needing to make sure that you are doing really good analytics on your data to come up with a social index, so that you understand the special needs related to, are they not getting care because they have transportation issues? Are there mobility issues? What are some of the reasons they aren't getting care, so that you can be sure that you're coming up with a supplemental benefits package that is going to work for your population? Because a good example I use is, we give our members gym memberships. Well, if most of your members are rural and there are no gyms or YMCAs, that's not going to help them. So it starts with those analytics to tell you about what your population's needs are, and then making sure that your bid, from a financial perspective addresses it, then operationalizing that, again, making sure that those, looking to make sure members are availing themselves of those services. They can be referred for services, right? Again, tools that help you do that. Is the loop getting closed? Are they getting them? And then is that utilization going up because you have done these things? They're getting the appropriate benefits. They're getting care. Of course, now with remote access technologies, it's a little bit easier. But that's a good place to start. Analytics, understanding your population, making sure your supplemental bid reflects what your population needs, and then of course making sure that data gets submitted to CMS, because they're going to be pretty aggressively policing the submission of this data for a variety of reasons, but they want to help. So reach out to any number of us who can help with these submissions if need be.
Yeah. Awesome, Don. I think just want to add to that a little bit different perspective, and love Kirk, your perspective on this too. Right, these members who are not able to get care, I think it'll be awesome to also, apart from all the things John said, it'll be also to show to the financial leaders around what are the potential, RAF for those members, right? What's the revenue left on the table, right? So that is something that not many people actually bring it up to the highest level. because they're working at the provider network. They're trying to noodle through. They're trying to noodle through the supplemental benefits. That's one of the other things that I would recommend as well. And Kirk, would love your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, well, these are often some of your highest risk members, right? I mean, there's a reason they can't get out and get to the doctor. These are often your dual eligible members, Medicaid and Medicare. So from a risk adjustment perspective, they're high value. So it's very much worth your time to make sure from a revenue perspective to make sure they're getting seen. That's, of course, there's the responsibility as a health plan and health provider to take care of your members, of course, but just from a financial perspective, it's very much worth your time to make sure that these members are provided care and documented. So that's
Awesome. All right, team. It's actually 12:30, and Don and Kirk, it's a pleasure. It was a fantastic discussion. Thank you so much, everyone who joined today. This will also be posted on LinkedIn for folks who are actually not able to join. But feel free to reach out to all three of us or individually, each one of us as well, via LinkedIn or email. And have a great weekend, everybody. Appreciate it.
all right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Take
Subbu.
care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kirk.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.